Kate Meltcher. Welcome to Psychics and Psychos Part 2, Charlie Manson. And this is Irish Granny Helen. And I'm here to tell you the story before Denise and I do the psychic analysis. In video number 1, we looked at Charles Manson's biography up till adulthood when he started to form his family in California. And we stopped right about the point where he met Dennis Wilson. And to understand the psychopathology of Charlie Manson, you really need to understand his relationships with people in the music industry, people in Hollywood, people in prison. He had a wide array of friends. So let's get started here and talk about what Charlie Manson's life was like when he moved to the Hollywood, LA area, and moving forward from that. So we know that Wilson, I'm double checking here. Yeah. Wilson had encountered 2 of the girls hitchhiking, taken them up to his fancy house in the canyon. And from there, of course, they told Charlie who they had met. He knew who Dennis Wilson was. They didn't. He saw dollar signs, musical notes. He thought he'd become a famous rock star. So, of course, he descended with his family in all their motley glory on Dennis Wilson's house. And Dennis Wilson was generous to a fault and looking for something, kind of rudderless, looking for a leader, a guru, a spiritual guide. And somehow or other, they managed to sell him on the notion that this was Charles Manson. Plus, he liked girls. So in the beginning, Wilson thought that Charlie was a genius. He bought Charlie to Brothers Records, which was the Beach Boys recording company in Hollywood, and they would often let their friends come and make records and try to be big stars. Dennis called Charlie the Wizard, but others in the company, Brothers Company, saw Charles as a transient, and they called him Pigpen because he was always filthy. His musical knowledge was minimal. It was quite apparent he knew nothing about music. He only knew a couple of chords on the guitar. The management at Brothers Records did a background check on him, no fools they, and they found Manson's serious criminal background. Dennis saw it as proof that Manson was not a phony. He was a real outlaw. And if you remember, we talked about all these elite scions of famous Hollywood families. For example, Peter Fonda, people like that. They wanted to be outlaws. They admired outlaws. Manson gave Wilson the lyrics for a couple of songs that Manson had written. And Dennis gave Charlie all kinds of stuff from his house. He even gave him some gold records that he had gotten as a Beach Boy. Charlie pulled a knife on a recording engineer and again on some of Dennis's girlfriends who wouldn't sleep with Manson. And Dennis realized that Manson had overstayed his welcome. So Dennis moved out of his house to a rental house. He knew that the lease on the fancy house was expiring. It was up for renewal, and he was going to have to either renew it or move out. And so he decided he would move out without letting Charlie know. And he let the landlord deal with Manson. Then Dennis used Charlie's lyrics. So the deal was Manson wrote these songs. They even recorded them. And his expectation was that Dennis was going to put them out in the public and make Charlie famous. If not that, he would use the lyrics word for word, not changing anything, and credit Manson. Well, Dennis changed just a couple of the lyrics and did not credit Manson and put it in one of his albums. And Charlie took this as a huge betrayal. He tried to borrow money from Dennis, but he couldn't find him because he'd moved out. So Charlie left a note in the house when he went to find Dennis, who wasn't there. And the note said, "You can't get away from me." And he left a bullet sitting on top of the note. After the Tate murders, Wilson admitted that he'd been really afraid of Charlie. And for the next 15 years, he spiraled downward and he drank. He became a drunk. And at the age of 39, he drowned in the ocean, in the marina, I think Marina del Rey, where a lot of fancy yachts are parked. And he was doing diving. Now, I could be wrong about what marina he drowned in, but somewhere there in LA. So now we're going to talk about the Spahn Ranch, the infamous Spahn Ranch. So after the eviction, Charlie left this bullet and this note for Dennis and took his family, and they decamped to Spahn Ranch. So this is an interesting place. It once belonged to William S. Hart. If you're interested in silent films, you'll recognize that name. He was one of the very first, excuse me, wood stove. My husband just put a log in and it lets smoke out. One of the very first silent movie cowboys. He was a very famous cowboy. And he bought this big chunk of land and, just outside LA. And it was a place where they built fake movie sets for cowboy movies, false fronted sets, and they kept horses, and they would rent the horses out for tourists, to go horseback riding for a few hours. And they would have movie people come and film scenes, with horseback and gun, gunslinger type movies. It was actually only 28 miles from Wilson's house. So it was used by B-movie creators mostly, and television for Westerns. They had the horses and the brush and the deserty looking area and the California hills. And you've probably seen it on Bonanza or something. Charles and his family camped there. They insinuated themselves into the daily workings of the ranch in 1968 and 1969. The place was in despair. Old man Spahn, because this was really a guy who owned the property, was over 80 and going blind, he was blind essentially, and was not able to really take care of the place. He had a few farm ranch hands who were there to help him, but they still rented out the horses and the buildings. And Chicago, my abbreviation, Charlie, insinuated himself into the environment. The girls came in quite handy. He had them kissing up to old man Spahn and to the ranch hands. Charlie was preparing the family for the apocalypse. He believed there was going to be a race war, that it was coming. Now, these are not my words for YouTube. These are not my words. This is what Charlie Manson believed, that he knew all about this because he got secret messages from the Beatles' White Album. He thought they were speaking to him directly. Lynette Fromm was given the job of sweet talking and giving favors and to taking care of old Mr. Spahn. And he really, really liked her. She spent all her time with him. He gave her the nickname Squeaky because of the sound she made. No, use your imagination. So he let the family stay for free in exchange for maintenance help and help with the horses and help with the renters who came, the horseback riding renters. Squeaky worked on old man Spahn and tried to get him to rewrite his will to leave the ranch to her. At this point, there were about 35 people in the family, mostly young girls. A couple of them had babies, some male hangers on. Charlie regaled them with these sermons. He would sit them all down and give them a little bit of, he'd give them quite a bit of LSD, and then he would preach at them and kind of pretend like he was Jesus. And he would take a little bit of LSD, but not nearly as much as they. And so he was really kind of in control of the whole thing. Spahn had some permanent ranch hands. There was Juan Flynn, Shorty Shea, and he really didn't like this crowd of dirty hippies, is what he called them. He tried to get Mr. Spahn to kick the family out because he felt they desecrated the property. They had no respect for it. They were dirty and broke things and didn't care. Shay actually beat Manson up when Charlie beat a woman up. So he demanded the use of a truck from this woman, and she refused. So he used his fists to try to convince her. And Shorty Shay was appalled, and he took care of Manson. But Charlie had, he was little, and he was completely without boundaries and fearless, but he was little. And he had his bodyguard, basically, is Tex Watson, who was he's described everywhere as a very scary dude. So the family scattered in several places. Most of them remained at the ranch. A few went to London. A few went out into Death Valley. He wanted to move everybody out to Death Valley because he felt it would be hard for them to get away from him once they were out there. But he stayed in the Spahn Ranch, close to Hollywood and stardom. He preached this notion of Helter Skelter. He told them that the Beatles had channeled Manson to write songs for the White Album. And so they really came from Manson, and that the Beatles were waiting for his reprise album for him to channel to them the next album. He told the family that the messages in the White Album were that he was their spiritual savior. The Beatles said so. He said the proof was the song Sexy Sadie. Susan Atkins had the nickname Sadie. They love to give nicknames. It's very interesting. There's this I'm using the word schizophrenic unprofessionally. I'm using it as sort of the sense of splits, divisions, and everybody had a nickname. It was very odd. So Susan Atkins was called Sadie, and when the Beatles' White Album came out, he said, "Oh, look, this is about Sexy Sadie." The song Little Piggies, he felt that was a song about the family. And the big piggies were in the song were the rich. They were too rich and they needed a damn good whacking, according to the lyrics of the song. Blackbird, that song, and Rocky Raccoon, he believed sang about the race war. And then he loved the song, felt it was prophetic. Happiness is a warm gun. The song Honey Pie, he believed, was telling the family to come to the United Kingdom to meet the Beatles because the Beatles were too lazy to come to the Spahn Ranch. This was Charlie's story. Okay, so Helter Skelter is the name of a kind of roller coaster from England. But it was a term that Charles stole from the Beatles album, and he used it to refer to the coming apocalypse. So in Death Valley, there's, it's a desert. And he said that there was a hole in the ground that was a bottomless pit where they could hide until the end of the apocalyptic war, and then they would emerge and lead because they were white. He was a hideous racist. He told everybody he was the king of men, that he would need to procreate to repopulate the earth with their own kind, and so he had urged them to get on with that project. His followers believed him, and some of them were just too scared of the threats he made to leave him. But meanwhile, he was still courting the music world. So he had this weird, once again, unprofessional, schizophrenic life going on where he was hobnobbing with famous musicians. He really did hang with famous musicians, Neil Young and Dennis Wilson, and there were others that I don't remember. But at the same time, he was preparing for this imaginary race war that he and the Beatles were communicating about and getting ready to go hide underground in Death Valley. And he actually bought dune buggies and a lot of weapons. So he wasn't just talking. He told the girls to be on their best behavior, and he took them to meet with the old prison pal that he had spoken with in prison. If you remember Phil Kaufman. Phil Kaufman was a music producer, and he buttered Charles up in prison because it behooved him to stay on his good side because he was a scary guy. And he was insincere in his flattery. He had a friend, Gary Stromberg, who was a Stromberry. Oh, his name was Stromberry. The hard name, Stromberry is how it's pronounced. And he met Charles and the girls, and he was really impressed by how much control Charles had over the girls. Don't know why that would impress him, but there you go. So Charles made a demo album, and he fell apart. He lost all his confidence under pressure. He didn't like the engineers telling him what to do, and that's when he began to threaten them, and Brian Wilson didn't like that. He had a 3-hour session, and it was a complete wash. He just failed miserably. Kaufman told him, keep working, and, it was very much a we'll call you, don't call us. Kaufman, like Wilson, led Manson on, because Kaufman was, he was hoping to make him, this is interesting. So in prison, he led him on. It was discretion. So Charlie shows up and wants to record. And it was good timing for Charles because Kaufman had been planning to make a movie about the return of Christ. And he needed extras, and he needed somebody who looked a little bit like Christ, and he needed something that looked something like the Middle East desert, and Charlie came, he was the whole package. So Charlie enthralled him with his preaching ability and his control over the women. But he had absolutely no interest in Charlie's music, but he led him on because of the movie. At one point, Manson joined this extended Hollywood crowd at Spahn, Topanga Canyon Ranch house called Spiral Staircase. It was the hub of all kinds of weirdos, is how it was described. Interestingly enough, a lot of people were transient. They came, they stayed, they left. They didn't have financial investment in the place. They just sort of hung out. And one of those people was Jay Sebring, and that name should ring a bell because he was killed with Sharon Tate. Charlie provided other interests for these music guys. He had orgies at the ranch, what was referred to as pansexual orgies. He took the family on what he called a magical mystery tour to the Mojave Desert and practiced survival skills with their dune buggies and their weapons and everything. He, would get them to not drink water all day and try to be tough. Anyway, he collected more women by preaching and dosing them with LSD. He interrogated them when he met them. He would spend a lot of time alone with these new women and want to uncover the means of controlling them, dig into their background and their family trauma, and use that as a weapon. He recruited, for example, and this young woman wrote a book, and it's a really, really interesting book. I should have looked the name of the book up, but her name is Diane Lake, and you can easily find her book. She was recruited when she was 14. So now her parents of the year, belonged to a cult that followed Wavy Gravy around. This was a hippie counterculture guy. They did dances at the, what would they call them? Like clubs. They weren't really They weren't full-size theaters. They weren't just for bars, but they would have music and drinks. And they would provide go-go dancers and psychedelic screens in the background. And, it was the 60s. So her parents, who had at least 3 children that I'm aware of, including this 14-year-old girl, said, sure, you can go live with this degenerate, criminal, dirty, crazy person and his 35 girlfriends out in the desert. Go right ahead. That's fine. You're 14. So off she went. He also recruited Dee Dee Shaw. Name should not ring a bell, but she was the daughter of Angela Lansbury, and she had her mother's credit card and let him use the credit card. And Angela Lansbury saw these charges and investigated and was absolutely horrified. And she cut up the card and stopped payment on any charges on the card. And when the daughter went to complain to her mother that the credit card didn't work anymore, she took her to Ireland, and they spent the rest of her teenage years in Ireland. Charlie actually wasn't interested in her as soon as the credit card stopped working. He told the girls that they would sprout wings and that they would either be killed or enslaved at the war, so they had to be very, very careful. He liked to keep them fearful. He would stand them up against a wall and throw knives at them for target practice. You know how they throw knives all around a person and hope they miss? He told the family that Helter Skelter would start when Black people broke into rich white houses, killed everyone, and wrote on the walls with their blood. That ought to sound familiar. So this would be their sign to flee to the desert, go underground, and survive in the desert. Tex left for a while because as he told people, oh, Charlie's getting too far out. But he had nowhere to go, and he had no money, and he had a hard time trying to survive because who would hire him, right? So he went back to the Spahn ranch and continued to hang out. Paul Watkins, another part of the family, he said that death was Charlie's trip. A lot of these people were interviewed after the fact. Greg Jacobson, who was the recruiter, the music person, he came to the ranch often, but he didn't come because he thought Charles' music was so great. He came because he was enthralled with Ruth Ann Morehouse, who was one of the younger young women in the group. He had an encounter with Charlie. They butted heads about something, and he told Charles, "You're full of you know what." And Charles pulled a gun on him. And he stayed really cool. This is this Hollywood big shot, right? He stayed really cool, and he left, and he told everybody that Charlie was into fear. So now this is 2 people have told people. Watkins and then this Greg guy had told people, this guy's into fear. He's into death. He's a scary guy. So we really can't talk about Manson without talking about these Hollywood musical people like Dennis Wilson and Kaufman. And then we get to the final, perhaps the biggest. He took the most advantage of Wilson, but he had the most hope hanging on Terry Meltcher. So Terry Meltcher was the son of Doris Day. He was a music producer. He, Dennis Wilson, and Greg Jacobson called themselves the Golden Penetrators. Charming. All he cared about, Meltcher, was profit. He was driven by this lust for profit in the Hollywood music scene. He was born into privilege. He was never told no. He had an absolutely charmed childhood. He hung out with rich Hollywood girls who were the daughters of people who were never told no. Doris, his mother, was a devout Christian Scientist. She had a broken picker. She had a number of very problematic relationships that always ended in mistreatment. And she sort of let her mother raise Terry. He was raised by his grandmother. Melcher got into music. He got into the world of music by producing the Byrds. So what happened was, he's on the periphery of the musical world because of his mother. And somebody met the Byrds and they were looking for a contract. And this was an older guy. And he said, "No, I don't know anything about this kind of music. I wonder who would." And his eyes fell on Melcher. And he thought, well, he's their age. Maybe he knows. And Melcher was made a producer, and he really liked the Byrds, and he was very successful in producing them, made a huge name for himself as a wunderkind of young people's counterculture music in Hollywood. So, little fun fact, all of these bands, these Laurel Canyon bands, like the majority of them, I wouldn't say 100%, but the majority of them were cobbled together at the spur of the moment. People who didn't know each other. And these are not kids that grew up together and played in their dad's garage from the 4th grade on. These were people who showed up in Hollywood, wanted to be famous, and got created into a band. But the ironic thing is most of them really couldn't play music very well. They really weren't great musicians. They might have been poets. They might have had a persona. So they got put together, and the music itself was all studio played. And it was played by this group of studio musicians called the Wrecking Crew. And I know I've talked about them before in the context of Karen Carpenter because she played with them. She played the drum with them and she sang with them. They played for everybody, and they were extremely talented. There is a wonderful, wonderful documentary about them. I don't remember where I watched it. It might have been Tubi. Agonizingly long chunks of commercials, but it's free. And it's called The Wrecking Crew, and you might want to Google it, make sure I have the title correct, but it's absolutely fascinating. Anyway, Melcher got the reputation as the go-to guy to deal with these counterculture hippie acts that, we all know what happened, the explosion of music in the 60s. He lived in Benedict Canyon. His girlfriend, off and on, frequent splitting and reuniting, was Candice Bergen. Her father had that dumb ventriloquist dummy in the 30s and 40s and was enormously famous and made a lot of money. And she was this sort of highfalutin kind of a Hollywood princess, very educated, very into designer clothes, and really looked down. She was rich and sophisticated, and was really not a part of the Laurel Canyon counterculture hippie scene. But she mingled with them kind of against her will, but her boyfriend was into it. So Terry was rich, but he wasn't sophisticated. He introduced her to the hippies. He and she lived together. They finally moved for a while. They rented a house on Cielo Drive. But they had servants there. This is a great little bit of gossip. And that, keep in mind, this is 1968, 1969. Candice Bergen spent $2,800 a month on flowers, bouquets for her house. Kind of puts it in perspective. So Melcher met Manson at the Spahn Ranch through Wilson and Jacobson. Candice was not interested. She wanted no part of these weird, dirty people. Terry liked the girls, which, it's kind of gross because these people never bathed. They lived in the dirt. They ate out of garbage cans. I don't know. Anyway, he liked them, and but still he was pragmatic about money. Money was his central concern. And he really wasn't convinced about Manson's music. He did not think that he was the wizard or a guru or talented at all. The Golden Penetrators recognized what Manson was up to. The three of them were star manipulators, and they saw that reflected in Manson's behavior. Melcher wasn't convinced about him, and he also wasn't convinced about Jacobson's plan for a movie about Christ. He was very much the pragmatic businessman. He never invited any of the family to Cielo Drive. There are some conflicting stories. Tex Watson tracked Meltcher down to Cielo Drive because he wanted to borrow a car, but he was not invited in. And then there's a story that I think I have this written down later. I'll try to remember. If I don't have it written down, I'll try to remind myself to tell you about it. Charlie was really frustrated because he didn't get any reaction or response from the music people. He made this 3-hour audition album demo and then crickets. And he was really getting antsy about it. Meanwhile, Terry and Bergen broke up again. She left. And he moved into his mother's Malibu house. She had recently been widowed, and he discovered that her husband's bad investments had practically impoverished her. So he was a money guy, and he moved into her beach house at Malibu, and he started cleaning up her financial woes. And he was totally distracted by all of the crises in his mother's life because she was upset about being widowed too. Charlie thought that Terry had dropped him. Terry had just had priorities, and Charlie was not high on the list. Charlie didn't know that Terry had moved out of Cielo Drive. So things are ratcheting up. Tensions are increasing. Charlie's getting less predictable. He started doing what the family began to call creepy crawls. They would go out at night. They would break into houses while the people in the house were asleep in bed at night. And they'd sneak around and rearrange stuff. Not necessarily steal anything, just rearrange the furniture and then leave. That's some serious psychopathology there. That's really very scary. Meltcher was a no-show. He made an appointment to go listen to Charlie, and then he never showed up. Charlie was really upset because he'd had a new deerskin outfit made for himself, and he'd had the girls clean up the ranch so it'd be all presentable for these Hollywood bigwigs, and then they didn't show up, and he was pissed. So March of '69, Charlie went to Cielo Drive, and he wanted to get a record deal or punish Meltcher. That's what he told everybody. But Meltcher had moved. And what he encountered was this European photographer who was there for a photo shoot. And he was there for a photo shoot with Sharon Tate. Her husband, Polanski, was in Europe making a movie. I think he was in Rome, if I remember correctly. And this photographer was Italian. And the photographer came out and dealt with Manson. But Tate just sort of peeked out to see what was going on and then went back in. And the photographer sent Charlie to the guest house, the bungalow. And the owner of the property was living in the bungalow. And he didn't like the cut of Charlie's jib. So when Charlie came looking for Meltcher, the owner in the bungalow told him, well, I have no idea where he's gone. He doesn't live here anymore. And I don't want you bothering my renters. Don't bother my tenant. He left. Tate said to the photographer, who was that creepy guy? He gave me chills. Meltcher rescheduled with Charlie, no explanation. He just, sorry, let's do it anyway. He came to the ranch and he listened and he told Charlie, well, maybe make some more demos. He gave him $50, but he didn't give him a contract. He did come back later on another day with a friend who had a roaming recording studio inside a van. They brought the van and showed up, and they did a couple of recordings. Charlie gave them LSD. They had a bad trip. The friend freaked out and started telling Terry Meltcher, this guy Charlie Manson, he's the devil. A drunk ranch hand this is all in the same day, pulled a gun on Charlie, and Charlie beat him up. Meltcher witnessed this whole thing, and the next day he called and told Charlie, sorry, no deal. He didn't say this to Charlie, but obviously after witnessing this debacle, he realized this guy's not stable, and he told him no deal. Charlie told everyone that Meltcher reneged, and now he was his enemy. Leslie Van Houten says it was a turning point. Charlie was mad all the time. He talked about death all the time. He asked us randomly all the time, would you die for me? The night crawls, the creepy crawls, they turned into robberies while the people were asleep in their rooms. And he started to talk about next time maybe we should tie people up. So this is escalating. Candace Bergen, living back again with Terry, living in the Malibu house on the beach with a deck on the beach, realized one day that the telescope, they had a very expensive telescope on the deck to look out at the ocean, was missing. And this freaked her out because she realized that some degenerate had been right there on their deck. And she left Terry, and that was the last time. She just bailed away from these crazy people. And the week after she left Terry, the Tate murders happened. Meltcher and Bergen narrowly escaped, and they split permanently. Meltcher slept with a gun and 24-hour bodyguards for a very long time after this. He and Wilson feared that Charlie from prison would hire a hitman. Many in Hollywood downplayed their association with Charlie because they were afraid to testify. People had, everybody was almost at the house that night. Everybody always talked about, well, I had plans to be there and then they got canceled. That was a very common dinner time conversation in Hollywood for years after. But the reality is when it came to speaking with the police and the district attorney, the prosecutors, they denied any kind of knowledge or association because they were all terrified. They were afraid if they testified, that would be it for them. Meltcher was able to save his mother's career. He got her a TV show, and it was very successful. He died of cancer in 2004, and he was survived by his mother. So I think I will stop here because the next topic of conversation is the murders themselves. And as you will find, there are quite a few more than you might think. And I don't want to be cutting off the list in the middle of it. So I'll be back soon and we'll cover this. And I'm trying to put a fire under Denise. Life gets in the way, but she was really eager to do Charles Manson. So I think it'll be very interesting to see what she comes up with on his chart. This takes me back. I'd not forgotten, but chosen to compartmentalize and not think about this time period in history because it was a very frightening time, which we're going to talk about some of that psychology soon. Not a fun time to think about. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching, and we will return. Slán go fóill, slánte.